Before we get started, you're all special, and you know the Mitroviches. We love our friends. And I won't go, there's so many of you here, but I do need to say to my wife and Heidi, welcome, I love you. Heidi's our daughter. And there's another special person here that I will acknowledge because he's part of this story, and that is the former professor at San Diego State University, Jesus Dominguez, the sculptor and creator of the statue. And now, just briefly, Chris, if we will, let's run George.
Those of you who will remember Fred Lebow will remember him for being in perpetual motion, not only as a human, but in organizing one of the great perpetual motion movements in the history of running, namely the marathon.
When I think of Fred and the marathon, I think about the way it began as a very, very small race for a few hundred, actually 100 runners, right in Central Park, no attention, no one really participating, a very, very small local event. 25 years later, the largest marathon in the world, one of the great sports events in our calendar, one of the great events in New York history. I mean, really something that takes New York and projects it all over the country and all over the world. All of that is due to Fred Lebow. So this is a very appropriate monument. And every time this race is run, people are going to know who started it and who inspired it. And they're going to remember. Thank you very much, Fred.
The marathon has deep roots. As legend tells us, in 490 BC, a soldier of the Greek army and messenger Phidippides ran from Marathon to Athens, Greece, to announce the victory over the rival army. He then dropped dead after making that announcement. I think it scared people off from doing marathons for a while, because it wasn't until the Olympics in Greece in 1896 that the marathon was first run. But in 1897, Boston started their marathon. I had the great pleasure in 1997 to run in the 100th anniversary of the Boston Marathon. It was a special time. On my way to Boston, I let the word go out that I wanted a photo op at the finish line the day before the Boston Marathon. And over 100 San Diego runners showed up for that photo. I later had that photo placed in a frame. I had 321 San Diego runners' names engraved into a plaque. With my 100th anniversary medal of that Boston Marathon, I then framed it and presented it to the Hall of Champions. San Diego, that was a major contingency to attend that 100th anniversary. In 1908, in the London Olympics, the distance of the marathon was set in stone. The royal family wanted the marathon to start at Windsor Palace and finish at White City Stadium, which was exactly 26 miles, 385 yards in front of their royal box. And that was how it became another 2 miles. And I know a lot of marathoners said, we've never seen a member of the royal family run the marathon. But I do have a story in there about that. In 1970, Fred Lebow and Vince Sciabba decided to form and start the marathon. The marathon in that year was 127 runners. And you would circle Central Park several times. Central Park is 2.5 miles from 59th to 110th, and a half mile across from Fifth Avenue to Central Park West. But in 1976, Mayor Abe Beame said, we can't call this the New York City Marathon. It's only one part if we're going to run it in Manhattan. We need to include all five of the other four boroughs to this race. And so that year, the marathon started in Staten Island, as it does today, across the 2-mile Verrazano Bridge into Brooklyn, home of a good friend here. 9 miles through Brooklyn, over the Pulaski Bridge into Queens. 3 miles to the Midtown Bridge, also known as 59th Street Bridge. Crossing that bridge into Manhattan, out on First Avenue, up First Avenue through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 110th Streets, and over into the Bronx, where you make a quick turn, cross the Madison Avenue Bridge, and there you head towards Central Park. Going down and turning at 59th Street and 5th Avenue, crossing over to Columbus Circle, and then entering the park. In 1990, I entered the park. As I got close to the sea, I could see that great New York City banner that all of us marathoners want to see when we start, because that's right at the finish. But there was a man standing right in the middle, in the midst of all of us runners. I recognized him, that it was Fred Lebow. He was looking at his watch. I yelled his name. He said, "You did it," and gave me a thumbs up. I crossed that finish line feeling that I had truly participated in one of the great events of the world. Today, there's over 50,000 runners that run in the New York City Marathon. It is no small thing. 2 to 3 million spectators watch the runners and cheer us on. I went to my room that night. I read up on Fred Lebow and found out he was suffering from brain cancer. This kind that took the lives of John McCain and a dear friend of our family, Beau Biden, recently. And I thought, my God, this guy, Fred Lebow, did something. I called George, Brother George. I told him about this. I said, we need to take Fred to the Oval Office to be honored by the President of the United States. George said, "Let me think about it." The next day, I got up very early. I went over to the Post Expo. I said, "I'm going to meet Fred Lebow." I walked in there. I asked for Fred Lebow. Sorry, he's not available. I kept persisting, as Mitroviches do. And I said, "I want to see him." The lady said, "You can't because he's not here, but there's a lady that's his closest friend and she's here." So out walked a lady named Ann Roberts, and she was the elite athlete coordinator of the New York City Marathon, and truly Fred's closest friend. She said, "How can I help you?" I said, "Well, I want to meet Fred Lebow. I want to have him honored by the president." She looked at me. "President of what?" I said, "Of the United States, the 41st president of the United States, George Herbert Walker Bush." She said, "Well, that would be very nice. Why don't you call me when you arrange that?" She turned around and walked away. I found out later that Fred was over at the finish line still, 24 hours later, greeting the Achilles Track Club members, especially challenged runners that wanted to be in a mainline sporting event created by my friend Dick Traum. He created the Achilles Track Club. 3 weeks later, I called Ann. Said, "Do you remember me?" Silence. I said, "Well, do you have Fred's calendar?" Silence. I said, "Well, January 31st at 3:35 p.m., Fred Lebow will walk into the Oval Office to be honored by the President of the United States." She said, "Are you for real?" I said, yes. I said, you will get a call from Lori Rosen, who worked for Senator Alan Simpson, the great Republican senator from the state of Wyoming, one of the true great leaders who back then and we need today about bipartisanship. Truly a wonderful man. January 31st came, 3:35. Brother George, Senator Simpson, Fred Lebow, and myself walked into the West Wing of the White House. We got inside. There was a man seated at the couch. He got up and he said hi to Al. And Al said, hey, Bob, how are you? It was Bob Dole. Bob Dole was introduced to us, but he kept focusing down at Fred's shoes. Fred had his running shoes on. Bob said, we never see shoes like that in the White House. Of course, that was to change when President Clinton became the leader of this country, and later by G.W. Bush, who was truly a great runner and has run marathons. We had a wonderful time in the Oval Office. When we left, driving in the car back to the Capitol, I said to Fred, I want to do a luncheon for you this year, 2 days before the marathon on Friday. He said, Dan, you got me in the White House. I bet you could do that. You've got my permission. I said, I need two things from you, Fred. You need to be there, and I want the official banner of the New York City Marathon there. He said, you will have it. Immediately after that, I called a friend of mine who was best man in our wedding, Michael Crom, the grandson of Dale Carnegie. I told him about the marathon and what I had done. He said, Dan, you need to talk to my dad, Ollie, who was CEO and president of Dale Carnegie Organization. So I called Ollie Crom and I said, this is what I want to do. Dale Carnegie was formed in 1912 on 112th Street in Manhattan. Ollie Crom said, Dan, this is what we stand for, what Fred Lebow's life has done for people to help motivate. I'm on board. We will do the luncheon, we'll underwrite the luncheon, and we'll do it at the Waldorf Astoria, because we've been doing it there for 80 years. But we didn't stop there. I got a call in March, that was 2 months after that, from Ann. She said, Fred's going to be in LA for the marathon with Dr. Bill Burke, Dan, and he wants you to come out and say hi and meet Bill. And I said, I'll be there. As I was driving from San Diego to Los Angeles, an idea came up here. And I thought, we need to do a statue of Fred Lebow, and we need to put it in Central Park. So when I got to the Bel Air Hotel, I saw Fred and Ann and met Bill Burke, who is a great friend of mine. And I said, Ann, come over here for a second. I said, I have something to say to you. She said, what now? I said, I'm going to do a statue of Fred Lebow, and we're going to put it in Central Park. She looked at me with that look she gave me back the day after the marathon. Can you do that? I said, well, I don't know about statues, but I'll figure it out. But I said, let's keep it a secret right now. So we said goodnight. I drove back to San Diego. On the way back, I thought, what have I done? What an impossible feat. I know nothing about it. And this predates, for you youth, the internet, where you could just Google in and find out pretty well anything you want. I had to go to the old-fashioned yellow book pages under monuments, and there was very little to find in San Diego. There was more in LA, but the price of these statues was $100,000 or more. Oh my God, I thought. I called a friend whose grandfather's statue stands over in Hazard Center. He said, well, Jesus Dominguez, a professor at San Diego State, did that statue. I got the phone number. I called, as we know now, Jesse Dominguez, introduced myself, told him about the marathon and what Fred had accomplished. He said, well, I would be interested. He said, we have to make a maquette, the scale model for what will be the life-size statue. He made that, and 3 days before that luncheon at the marathon in 1991 at the Waldorf, I asked Greta Weitz, the great runner. She had won 9 New York City marathons, and I will say that will never be repeated by anyone. I asked Greta to come to the luncheon and unveil the maquette. Now, I didn't tell anybody about this, understand. One thing you learn when you're going to do the impossible, you don't ask permission. Because sure enough, somebody's going to say no. And then, as Steve Peace knows so well, you have a problem. At that luncheon, we had the mayor's staff. In those days, it was Mayor Dinkins. We had the park staff and a commissioner named Henry Stern. Henry Stern was nobody's fool. He was commissioner through 3 mayors. He knew every park and every tree in New York City. That's all 5 boroughs. We had our local coach, who's retired now, Steve Scott, the great miler. We had Alberto Salazar, the great runner and marathoner. We had Carl Lewis and his coach, Joe Douglas, the founder of the Santa Monica Track Club. We had dignitaries, but we had George Plimpton as our MC. We had Alan K. Simpson, the senator, to give a keynote address. And after that keynote, I went up to the podium and I asked, at this time, we have an unveiling. Greta Weitz pulled the veil off of the maquette. I said, someday there will be a statue of this in Central Park. Now, Linda, my wife, would tell you, she was sitting at the table with the parks commissioners and the mayor's staff, and they looked, who is this guy? We've never talked to him. Henry Stern said later that day, it will be easier for you to take the camel through the eye of the needle than to you put a statue in my park. Henry became a great friend. After that, I had a long list of things to do. How do you build a statue? How do you pay for it? I came back to San Diego, and actually a couple of years passed by. I got a call from Ann Roberts in New York. She said, Dan, Fred's not doing well. We don't know if he's going to make it for the 25th anniversary of the marathon. Can you have that statue ready and in New York? That was only March, as Jesus knows so well. I said, of course we'll have that statue there. Called Jesse and I said, we got to have that statue ready. 3 months before we started working on that statue, it was October. Jesse called me and said the statue will be ready. Now realize that was just 9 days before the 25th anniversary of the New York City Marathon. He said, but Dan, I must warn you, when we take it out of the molds, it could break. Scared me to death. Scared me to death. Linda and I, and Heidi actually, went over, we unveiled it. Heidi, Linda, and I helped put the patina on, along with so many of your staff at San Diego State. Just wonderful. Come together to get that statue ready. I had to get it, though, from San Diego State to LAX. I had called Continental Airlines and they said, we will fly it there for free. But how am I going to get it to LA? I called Roger Hitchcock. I said, Roger, I need to come on your show. He said, why? I need a driver to take a statue to L.A., and I need to tell you about the statue. Roger had me come right down, go on the air, and within minutes, there were calls to our office, Linda's in my office, of people that offered to drive that statue to Los Angeles. Electronic transfer services donated their time and energy. They said, what time are we be there at San Diego State to pick up the statue tomorrow? I said, 5:30. Jesse said it'd be ready at 5:30. We were there at 5:30. Linda, Heidi, and me. Well, I want to tell you something. It wasn't ready. I'd called New York. Everything was set. And so, finally at 11 o'clock at night, we pushed the crate with that statue onto the truck. The three of us, Heidi, Linda, and I, followed that truck all the way to LAX to Continental Airlines. They were asleep. We got there, and I helped push that crate right onto the loading dock. We drove, had to get back to San Diego. We drove to Anaheim. I said, I'm too tired. I can't drive anymore. So we checked into the hotel, slept for 3 hours, 4 hours. The next day we got back to San Diego, and I called Newark Airport, Continental Airlines loading, and I said, this is Mr. Mitrovich. The man on the other end of the phone said, we know who you are. And I can assure you, Fred is well. And we are taking care of Fred, and he will be there in the park. I had to get on the plane a day earlier than Linda. She had many things to do to prepare to get to New York. Got to New York, and Jesse and his wife attended. I called Jesse. I said, they've got a problem, Jesse. In the Jewish faith, of the particular faith, statues cannot be, because there can be nothing better than God. The family of Fred Lebow that I had never met said, that's not, you can't unveil that statue. I thought, how will we handle this? So the rabbi said, if you do something to make the statue imperfect, I will allow it. That Friday morning, Jesse and I went up under the veil of that statue, which was covered so nobody could see. And Jesse chiseled a little piece between the fingers out of that statue. The rabbi looked at it and said, okay, you can do it. You have to know when somebody from California is doing something in New York and they've never met you before, and the family, they always question, who is this guy? What is his motive? Well, my motive was to do something for their brother, who did so much for so many. So on that day, we unveiled the statue, but we only had a 3-day permit. After that run in 94, the statue had to go in storage. I called Bill Burke in LA, and I said, Bill, need some help, we need some money. He said, well, Dan, let's fly the statue out to LA. So the statue went back to Los Angeles to stand at the Expo, the LA Marathon. It was to stand at the finish line for the LA Marathon, but it was one of the rainiest times in the history of that marathon, and the statue got lost. So I called New York Daily News and I said, Fred is lost in LA. Headline story, Fred is lost in LA. I actually knew where Fred was. Found the statue. We flew the statue back to New York. A year later, in 95, Warner Leroy, the owner of Tavern on the Green, the founder of that and the Russian Tea Room, whose wife was daughter of Jack Warner. His own father was Mervyn Leroy, the creator of Wizard of Oz, one of the great producers of all time. Warner took a liking to me, took a liking to Linda. He said to me, we can put it right here in my property, overlooking the finish line. I went down to the Arts Council of New York, which has to approve monuments and buildings. I met the executive director, and she and I got along. She said, well, Dan, we could do that. We could do it with a permit as long as we move it once a year. We can bypass all the bureaucracy of New York. I told Warner Leroy's done. So the statue then in 95 was placed near the finish line, but not permanent. It was 9/11 in 2001, and that unbelievable tragedy that occurred in our country, in New York City. 3 weeks after that, the chief of staff for Mayor Giuliani called me. She said, Dan, the mayor wants to make the statue permanent because you know he's leaving office. Can you have it ready, the ceremony, by then? So 3 days before the marathon, we had the official dedication of that statue. It was quite a ceremony, and I should let you know, Fred Lebow never saw the life-size statue. He died 27 days before we unveiled it in 94. But he said on his deathbed in an article in Reader's Digest to Greta Weitz, he said, my friend, a runner, has commissioned a statue to be unveiled at the finish line. What have I done to deserve that? And Greta said, Fred, for me, for thousands of others, and for marathons around the world, you deserve every bit of that statue. The 9/11 ceremony came. I had the lead singer for the New York City Opera. I had the great late Dr. Arthur Caliandro, the senior minister of the Marble Collegiate Church, come to do the invocation. But I had one more request needed. Commissioner Stearns in New York said, Dan, we need some money for this statue. We can't just put it there. I got on the phone and I called Bobby Barrett, the vice chancellor of the Viejas Band of Kumeyaay Indians. I said, Bobby, I need some money. And I told him about it. He said, that's some money, Dan. He said, let me go to tribal council tomorrow. He called me and Linda back, brings tears to my eyes as I talk about it. He says, you will have the check. Can I present it? And I want to bring someone with me to the ceremony. Bobby Barrett and his bird singer, Raul Chrisman, flew to New York. They were there at the ceremony. They presented that check to the Parks of New York. And Bobby's request was, I want to go to ground zero. Now realize this was a very close time. Nobody was getting to ground zero. The commander of the New York NYPD said to me, Mr. Mitrovich, I will take them down there personally. He got Bobby and Raul in the car. He asked, do you and Linda want to go? I said, no, we don't. This is for them, please. And he took him to ground zero. And the bird singer did a ceremony at ground zero. The only Native American member to do that. Fred Lebow kept doing things. Our own daughter Heidi was a worker for Red Cross. Well, she was in AmeriCorps, but they loaned her to Red Cross. She worked to interview those families, one of the toughest jobs of her life. She was also down there. But in one other thing I need to say, because it's important. I got a call a few weeks before that from a captain of United Airlines. And he said, I'm going to take a flag and run it from Boston, from the capital, to Los Angeles. and I need help. Can you help us in LA? Can you arrange to make things happen for us out there? Of course, I know no better than to say yes. I said, yes, that will happen. I also got a call from a captain of U.S. Air. He said, my wife was on flight 77 that crashed into the Pentagon. He cried. He said, can you remember her in some way? I said, consider it done. It will be done. On that ceremony on 9/11, that 3 days before that marathon, I had United Airline personnel in uniform and American Airline personnel in uniform. And I had all of the names of the flight crews who were lost on all 4 flights engraved, placed on a replica of Fred, and presented to that captain who lost his wife. And so I say to you, that's what my book is about. It's about never asking permission. If it's something is good enough and meaningful enough in life, you don't take no for an answer. You just stick at it. And that's what we're about in this country, and the good people all around the world that accomplish things every day. My book has no negative in it. From page 1 to the final chapter 18, there's no negative. It's all about doing the right thing and believing that you can accomplish it, because it is. My chapter 18, I'll close with this. I closed chapter 18 with the Boston Marathon. The reason being, the 117th run in the Boston Marathon, the bombs went off. We got a lot of phone calls. Were you there? Fred would have been there at the finish line. I called Billy Rogers, the great Boston marathoner who won 4 times and New York 4 times. And I used his words in chapter 18 to finish. He said that if you know Bill Rogers, he's a funny guy and a great human being, but he would say, those puny little murdering people will never get away with it. And they didn't. Thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoy the read of my book. Thank you. Thank you.